Hello, and welcome to the Unwatchables, a show where we talk movies, but not just any movies. Here we talk about movies that we call one-timers and no-timers. One-timers being movies that we recommend seeing at least once, and no-timers being movies that we recommend that you never see. And keep in mind, this is a spoiler-filled podcast. Today, our one-timer will be Pacific Rim, and our no-timer will be Isle of Dogs.
Perfect. Well, I'm Marcus, and I'm joined by Kylie. So let's first start with Pacific Rim. So Pacific Rim, the first one came out in 2013. It was directed by Guillermo del Toro. I feel like this film is the definition of one-timer. Well, the reason why I believe that is the first time I saw the film, I was blown away. I watched in IMAX 3D, and I thought, wow, this movie is phenomenal. Especially 2013, so maybe the visual effects at that time were a little bit better than they are today. But when I watched it, I was just blown away. I was with a couple friends, and the fights looked amazing. The blue fire looked great. And I thought, wow, this is a really good movie. And then I watched it a second time in the theaters, and I thought, this movie, it's not as good as the first time. I think the second time I watched it was just normal, non-IMAX 3D. And then I've seen it a couple subsequent times on like at home or at the gym, and the movie is just so bland. It's really boring. Kylie, what are your thoughts? Well, because you didn't see it in the theaters, right? You just watched it at home for the first time.
Right, so going off of that, it's these giant monsters that are supposed to be the size of buildings, and when you're in the theater, that message pretty much gets across, and they look, huge, but when you watch it on a normal TV, it's a pretty regular film. If you took those monsters and those giant robots and you shrunk them down to people size, there's nothing really special about the action anymore. And so I think in order to appreciate it, you have to have seen it in the theater, which I did not.
Yeah, I just feel like with this, there's a lot of things to really have to question after this kind of movie. Like the first one is, I don't think Guillermo del Toro is that great of an actor. I don't think that guy from Sons of Anarchy, that's the star of Pacific Rim, I don't think he's a very good actor. And I just think that the plot itself is just so bland. And I don't really know if Guillermo del Toro knows how to write love stories. Every film, at least most of the films I've seen with him when he writes love stories, they're just so off. The best film he ever did was Pan's Labyrinth. And that film's love interest is basically this very abusive dad, or this man who's like a general or something like that, or a colonel in Franco's army during the Spanish Civil War. And he's trying to get this girl's mom pregnant that he just got married to. And he's really abusive and he's a jerk. And then the little girl in the film, it's basically, there's a lot of innuendo about the Fawn's character in that. Basically kind of preying on her like a pedophile. So in Pan's Labyrinth, the relationships are really not correct. Or they're just kind of really weird and kind of distorted. And then you jump to Crimson Peak. It's okay, with that story, the love interest is the girl from Alice in Wonderland, and she gets married to Tom Hiddleston's character, right? But in the film, Tom Hiddleston is having a sexual relationship with his sister, his biological sister, right? So okay, that's another weird relationship. And then you get down to The Shape of Water, and that film has 2 masturbation scenes, 2 human on fish sex scenes. I just really don't think Guillermo del Toro has he doesn't know how to do love relationships, because in this film it's okay, the girl and the guy, you think they're going to get together, right? But everything is leading to that happening. And at the film, they just hug it out. They get shot up out of the water after almost dying, and then he's oh, you're such a good friend. Come here and give me a hug. It's what the heck is this?
I don't know. Maybe he wasn't trying to be basic and just have it be like every other movie, but pretty much every other thing about this movie, every other character was really stereotypical. It was all pretty basic, and so why not just make the basic grand finale be the guy and the girl hooking up,
Well, it's I think in a lot of typical films, the reason why the man and the woman get together oftentimes is because that's what people like to see. Because then, it's oh, you've got the girl, or the girl has the guy, and they're living happily ever after. This is, I don't know, it just seems so weird. And I think that just goes to the whole overall plot of this film that, it's just so generic.
Yeah, I think, I definitely think that this film was not geared towards an audience such as myself. I think it was more for probably teenage boys, people who love really intense action, people who love, I don't know, monster trucks, and just they need those visuals and that magnitude of these giant monsters and robots to enjoy the action, I guess.
So the audience for this is 14-year-old boys that like monster trucks.
That's my best guess, honestly.
I think, I mean, you might be right. I mean, I don't think Guillermo del Toro really like knows how to communicate with those guys either. Because I mean, with this film, right, he worked on the screenplay. This isn't based on an original IP. And two, this is one of the films too that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, was probably back in like 2009, 2010. Guillermo del Toro was attached to direct all the Hobbits. And Peter Jackson was just going to be like involved, but not going to direct him. And then Guillermo del Toro, he walked away after working on the screenplays. He walked away to do like all these different projects. He was attached. Like at one time, he was attached to a Haunted Mansion movie, like a Pinocchio movie. He was attached to this Pacific Rim, and he was gonna work on like all these projects. And then a lot of them ended up falling through. And like this was the film. He partially chose to do Pacific Rim over the Hobbits. And you just look at it and you're like, what kind of decision making was that idea?
I don't know. I think that his collective movies that he's directed, they're all very different, and none of them really, like, I can't say that I've watched a film because I've seen Shape of Water and now Pacific Rim, and they're nothing alike. I can't really pinpoint his style at all, besides, you know, like as you were saying, not being able to really communicate a romantic relationship.
So after Pacific Rim, he goes to do Crimson Peak, and you think to yourself, oh, Crimson Peak is going to be like a Victorian era horror film, right? Like late 1900s, right? Or late 1800s, 19th century. I mean, that film, it looks aesthetically like how you would think it would look, right? Like it kind of looks a little spooky. There's a big mansion, there's snow and everything, and you think, wow, it looks the part. But then it's so stupid. Like, it doesn't have any good finale, and it's just, like, what am I watching? Like, this guy's having sex with his sister, and he gets stabbed to death by her? And, like, that's what I mean, like, with him, where it's like, I feel like he just goes, like, way... I don't think he can, like, land an execution in any film I've seen him do, other than Pan's Labyrinth. And Pan's Labyrinth, again, with that film, even though I really liked it and I haven't seen it in a long time, I mean, the fawn brings the girl, I'm pretty sure, like into his realm so she could be the queen or whatever there, but I'm pretty sure there's some kind of insinuation that she like dies or has to sacrifice herself. But like in the context of that, it's kind of like, well, here's this little girl teaming up with the fawn, and the fawn's like legacy, or I guess the mythos about the fawn is that he would go to the woods and he would lure in children by playing like music and stuff. And then they would come out there, the children, and, like, he would molest them. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know what the heck's in this guy's head, but, like... And Pacific Rim, it just looked like someone told Guillermo del Toro, they said, oh, yeah, make a film that's a big action film, but have it be based on no existing IP. So he did it, and, like, you can't watch it on TV.
No, I think something that it could have benefited from is definitely trying to shape the characters a little bit more, because they do have backstory. And what is his name, Rayleigh, or is it Raleigh, the main character?
Raleigh, the guy from Sons of Anarchy.
Yeah, so his backstory takes up the first 17 minutes of the film, and then they finally play the title card of Pacific Rim. So they give you 17 minutes of his background, which is pretty boring. It's just him fighting and his brother dies, which could have taken 2 minutes. And then you have, I think her name is Mako, who is the girl in the film, and her backstory was way more interesting. And Idris Elba's character had found her, and she was running from this monster, and it made me think, why wasn't she the main character? Because I think that they could have taken the time to develop her a little bit more, rather than Raleigh, whose backstory was honestly kind of boring to me.
Well, with that girl that you mentioned too, I mean, even though this is Pacific Rim 2, this happens, but like, she ends up dying like a jabroni halfway through it. Like, she's in a helicopter, and one of the kaiju monsters or whatever that's disguised as a robot, like, just kills her.
Oh.
Like, the second one, I mean, I guess I'll give this one props. It's better than the second one. The second one is certainly a no-timer. And yeah, they even bring back the guy from Sons of Anarchy. He's not even in it at all, Pacific Rim 2. And yeah, that Maso or whatever, like the girl you mentioned. Yeah, she dies like halfway through the film, like really in a stupid and like unimportant way. And it's also interesting too, like, so Charlie is Day's character, right? The guy from So I Sunny in Philadelphia.
Dr. Newt.
Yeah, in the second one, he basically this is gonna sound fake. I mean, if you haven't seen it, you're gonna think it sounds fake. The second one, he basically, his mind is like linked to the kaiju's brain, but like he also has like a romantic relationship with the brain. Like it's like his, I think he calls it his wife in the second one, and it's like it's controlling him. He's basically the bad guy in the second one. Like, I mean, I just feel like when you watch this film, I just feel like, why not make a Gundam movie? Like, there's so many other existing properties that are about big robots fighting big monsters. So you could have done a Gundam movie, or you could have done like an Evangelion movie. I mean, there's so many other animes that are just so much better made that you could have adapted instead of just creating like a new IP. And this film too, it didn't do very well in America. Like, so I looked up the box office numbers. It only made 25% of its total like global, like all the money that it made globally. It only made 25% of that in the U.S. It made more money in China than it did the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense, having a lot of the action based in Hong Kong, and having the Chinese actress, right?
Yeah. Well, that again, and the second one just turns into a big corporate horror product in that, like, the second film, like, it almost exclusively takes place in China, and like every time that like an American studio is influenced by the Chinese, the film just looks like total crap. Like the writing makes no sense, and it's just really stupid. Like they did that with the Meg, and it just looks like they're trying to appease the Chinese, and like the film just suffers so much. So the second one, they just ratchet up. They're like, oh, the Chinese, they ate up Pacific Rim, and Americans don't even care about it. So, because the movie only made $125 million in America. So, like, if it was only for the domestic box office, the movie would have been considered a bomb.
That's true, but I think that they're trying to cater more to their Chinese audience just because China is so big, and it is a really big audience.
Yeah, but also it made more money. Yeah, it made more money in China than it did the U.S. the first one and the second one.
Yeah, I mean, that might make it somewhat of a success in China. Maybe they think it's a really great movie, but...
Well, I have a friend that works in one of the studios, and he was telling me that, like, when, like, a lot of the film goers in China, what they do is when they see these big American action films, that oftentimes they won't even see the film with subtitles. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, imagine you're a Chinese guy and you're going to see Transformers 5, or you're seeing Pacific Rim 2, and it's not in subtitles at all. And if you don't speak English, you are literally only going to watch visual, like, spectacle, right? You can't understand what's being said. I mean, it'd be like us trying to watch a Chinese movie with no subtitles. What on earth would we be watching?
Right. I mean, I think that that's what makes it a one-timer, is just the fact that, you know, it's visually pretty cool. It's not necessarily what I tend to enjoy, but I can appreciate it because I think that for 2013, you know, the visual effects, they're pretty well done. I didn't think that it looked super CGI or any of that, even though there were these huge, you know, monsters and stuff like that in the ocean. So I think that I can commend it for that, at least.
Well, I mean, I certainly think, I mean, even though, you know, again, totally dumped on this film, there are a lot of cool things in the film. I mean, there's a number of good fight scenes. There's a fight scene where all the good Jaeger, that's what the robots are called, the Jaegers and their pilots, they confront, like, I think 2 different monsters. And so it's like a big old, like, WWE style fight in the ocean. And, you know, there's a part where, you know, they grab, like, this big, like, carrier, like what they would travel, like, on boats or whatever, like big carrier boats. And one robot grabs that and he smacks in the face of the monster, the kaiju. And it's like, wow, that looks pretty cool. I mean, if you just watched, like, a compilation video of maybe a 20-minute video of just the fight scenes, you might like that if you can blow it up on your huge TV. But yeah, everything else, I mean, there's like a 45-minute stretch where there's like no robots. There's no Jaegers for like 40 minutes.
Yeah, I think that that was something that made this movie suffer. It's over 2 hours long, and I feel like a lot of it was just filler, and a lot of it was just failed attempts at comedy. Because for me, I really did not like Charlie Day's character, Dr. Newton. I thought that he was just sort of overly ridiculous and annoying, and he's just sort of that crazy, skittish, weird scientist guy. And
I
then,
mean, yeah, I mean, like watching Charlie Day as a scientist, because that film, I'm trying to think, Transformers 4 came out maybe 14 or 13, so it came out like within a couple years. Like Mark Wahlberg and Charlie Day as scientists are the most unbelievable scientists I've ever seen on screen. Like Charlie Day, I mean, you watch him in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and he's, like crawling around in the sewer, and he's getting like diseases, and he's a drug addict, and he's illiterate. And I believe that's more like him a little bit in real life than like in Pacific Rim, where he's a scientist.
yeah, I think that they were trying to use him as the comedy factor because all action, has a little bit of comedy. And so he was supposed to be like comedic relief, but I just thought that he was so annoying. And I mean, maybe some people thought that he was funny and they enjoyed him, but for me, I just thought that, his lines, his dialogue, none of it was really very clever. It wasn't very thought out. It was just pretty stereotypical. And then you had the other scientist, and I can't remember his name, but he was just also pretty stereotypical, but he was like the old, kind of shaky, sort of weird loner
Like
scientist.
eccentric, like Asperger's or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
but even with that actor too, I thought the same thing. So he was in The Dark Knight Rises, and that came out 2012. So it's like 1 year later, he's in this one. I thought the same thing because in The Dark Knight Rises, he's very like snaky and cowardice. I don't know if you ever saw Dark Knight Rises, but he's like he helps the guy from the main bad guy from Ready Player One. He's like that guy's right hand man in The Dark Knight Rises. And then like that guy, that same guy that's in the Pacific Rim, he ends up like walking out on the ice of Dark Knight Rises, and he dies. Like the ice collapses and he dies, like he's forced out. And yeah, so it's like I was thinking to myself, the last time I saw that guy, he's like this really weaselly kind of guy. And then he's in this film, and now it's like, oh, he's like a smart weasel. That's a good guy.
Yeah. But
It's like, yeah, it's a really, like you said, it's a really weird dynamic because the two of them, because they're like the comedic smart guys, but like they don't have any crossover with like the Sons of Anarchy guy and Idris Elba and the girl. Like they hardly interact with each other.
no, it's pretty much like two separate plots, I would say. And I don't know. I think that was what they did with, melding their brains or whatever, where he connected his brain with one of the monster's brains. Did that have
Yeah.
some sort of effect on the climax? Were they doing that in order to help them, or was that a completely separate plot?
No, I think that they, what was that called? It wasn't
Drifting?
Deep Dive. Yeah, that was it, Drifting.
Drifting?
When they did that, I think that allowed them to see the dimension that the
Right.
aliens were coming from. So they knew that there was like that hole at the bottom of whatever, the Pacific Ocean, and that, that was where the Jaegers had to go to destroy it.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many ridiculous characters in this movie. Another one I would say is the Australian guy. He was just sort of a secondary antagonist and, like, for no reason, really. Like, it didn't push the plot along at all for me, and I think that he was pretty forgettable.
Like his dad is one that he sacrificed. The Australian guy sacrifices himself, right? And the dad kind of like watches from the command center, right?
Yeah.
And like there's also a guy in the film that looks like a Rob Schneider knockoff. He's the guy that has like the bow tie, and he has his hair from like the 1950s style. He had like a long, like he had like a dress shirt that he kind of rolled up the sleeves. He was like another scientist.
I mean, he must have been totally forgettable, because I don't remember.
Oh, I'm pretty sure he's in the film. There's a guy that looks like Rob Schneider from what's it? Grown Ups. Looks like Rob
Okay.
Schneider from Grown Ups with that like weird kind of like hair pulled back. Yeah, I mean, no, there are a lot of very forgettable characters. I think also too, I think someone told Idris Elba that he was playing Mandela or Winston Churchill or something, because when he did so much speaking.
Yeah, he did.
Like, he did a lot of speeches in the film, and usually most films don't give you more than one speech. Only that film and Black Klansman have ever seen a film where, like, there's so many speeches. There's, like, this day will live in infamy. It's like, you're talking about fighting big robots, like...
Yeah, I think that they were just trying to
or
take...
big monsters.
Yeah, I think they were trying to take advantage of the fact that they had Idris Elba because he is one of the most incredible voices of all time. I don't know if you saw The Jungle Book, but he voiced Shere Khan, and he has an amazing voice, so if anything, they were just milking that.
Well, I also thought, too, I kind of thought they ripped off Independence Day a little bit. Remember the president that gives that, like, rousing speech, and everybody, like, even though, I wish I could remember that actor's name, because he was also the dad in Casper. Yeah, he gave that rousing speech. It's like, today is all of our independence. And I think they thought, oh, we're going to, like, copy the essence of that and have Idris Elba. But, I mean, it did not have the same effect.
No.
I mean, obviously Independence Day is the first one. It's such an iconic film.
Yeah, I think that when you try to sort of make a cookie-cutter film like that, it kind of flops because it's something that you've already seen before.
Yeah.
It's not really something that needs to be made again. And that's another reason why I didn't really enjoy this film, is because I can really only handle so many giant robot versus monster films with giant action. It's not really...
And bad acting.
And bad acting.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with this film, I mean, if you can somehow watch it in IMAX 3D, I think you would very much enjoy it in IMAX 3D. If you're on Netflix and you watch it and your TV is a 40-inch TV, I don't really think you're going to really care for it that much. I mean, it's not like the worst film you've ever seen in your life. It's better than Pacific Rim 2. I mean, you just won't get the same effect.
No, I mean, basically to sum it up, just the character's lack of depth really can't make up for, the action. Like, it won't be the same movie on a smaller screen, because, you won't really care for any of the characters, and it won't be something that resonates with you.
Perfect. All right, so now let's move over to Isle of Dogs.
Okay, so Isle of Dogs is our no-timer today, and I'm just going to break down the plot really quick. So, in this Wes Anderson movie, there is an outbreak of the dog flu in the city of Megasaki, Japan, and the mayor has demanded that all dogs are to be sent away to what's called Trash Island, which is just exactly what it is. It's an island of trash. And there's a young boy that flies to the island. His name is Atari, and he's only 12 years old. And he sets out to find his dog Spots, who's been lost on the island. And along the way, he meets 5 other dogs who help him on his journey.
So, I mean, Isle of Dogs is definitely a film that if you're a person that you don't like if you don't like Wes Anderson, there's no way on earth you're going to like this film. Because this film it's so quirky and it's so weird, and you would swear that it was based on some existing property. You would swear that it was based on some Japanese anime or like comic or show or video game, and it's completely not. Wes Anderson and Jason Schwartzman, who's a collaborative of his that he's worked on a number of films with, who's also related to Francis Ford Coppola, they made the story. So it's totally all from the mind of Wes Anderson, just like most of his stories. And yeah, I mean, it's very weird to describe, and there's a lot of parts in this film where, I mean, some of the characters, so like Hailey mentioned, it takes place in Japan, right? Like when the humans are talking, they're speaking in Japanese, except for there's an American girl in the film who speaks English. So when the boy talks, Atari, he speaks in Japanese, and there's no subtitles. So it's like and it's very slow. It has a lot of the tropes that Wes Anderson uses very often, in that it's kind of slow. There's not a lot of talking, and when there is talking, sometimes this is Atari speaking Japanese with no subtitles. And yeah, I mean, if you're not a Wes Anderson fan, you're just gonna think it's really boring.
Yeah, going off of that, when they're speaking in Japanese, some people could argue and say, well, maybe it's not for the American viewership, but on the other hand, it's Wes Anderson, who's a white director, and the cast is completely filled with white actors. And so you can't really argue that it's geared towards the Japanese audience. And so the fact that there's so much broken dialogue between the dog speaking in English for some reason, and then all the people speaking in Japanese, and then occasionally having it translated, but there's multiple scenes where there's no subtitles, and you just sort of have to rely on the imagery and what's going on to figure out what's happening, which is pretty easy to do, but I think that it's pretty reliant upon the aesthetic, and if you don't enjoy the aesthetic of Wes Anderson or just this film in particular, you're not going to enjoy the film at all.
I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways, Isle of Dogs is almost a poor man's Fantastic Mr. Fox. And, I mean, Wes Anderson in both of those films. And, yeah, I honestly think a part of the reason why I think this film is a no-timer is that I think, in comparison to other Wes Anderson films, I feel like, first off, Wes Anderson is almost like his own thing. Like, he's almost his own genre of film in the same way that Quentin Tarantino is his own genre of film. Like, his films are so different from other films, you can just immediately tell it's him. And the same thing with Wes Anderson. Every film after Rushmore, you can tell that it's like, you could tell it's him. Like Wes Anderson, every film, like Royal Tenenbaums, Life Aquatic, Darjeeling Unlimited, Moonrise Kingdom, all these films, you can tell that it's him by the way that it looks and the fact that it plays out like a storybook, the way that the dialogue is delivered, the deadpan, sometimes there not being a lot of music in scenes or background sounds, and it just, you can totally tell it's him. It's almost like a book come to life. So going based on that standard, so you compare this film, Isle of Dogs, to the Wes Anderson films, and yeah, I mean has the aesthetics and the basic plot of a film that's for kids. Basically, this idea of a young boy searching for his dog. I mean, that plot, it hasn't been done in a little while, but there was a lot of films about that similar thing that came out in the 80s and 90s, where it was about, boys or a boy trying to find his lost dog or something like that, or a dog trying to get home. Yeah, so that plot is for kids, but the kids wouldn't really like Isle of Dogs because it's too boring and there's not a lot of dialogue, and the main boy himself doesn't speak English. And kids don't really like reading subtitles of Japanese characters speaking to each other. So, I mean, if you're a person that you're a fan of Wes Anderson and you're 30 years old, or you're 35 years old, I mean, even this film doesn't really fit with what you want anyways.
Yeah, it's really hard to figure out who this film is for. My best guess is people that are dog lovers. That's what I've decided is who this film was for, but even so, the dogs are humanized quite a bit. They're speaking in English, and it seems as though they speak directly to Atari in the film, and then he speaks back to them in Japanese, but it's really hard to tell because usually in movies where, animals communicate in English with one another, when they talk to humans, it just sounds like barking. Mm-hmm. But because you don't get subtitles when Atari speaks, you can't really tell if he's actually responding to what they're saying. And so the laws of nature and everything are really unclear in this film as well, which makes it pretty confusing.
Yeah, because it definitely give off the implication that these dogs aren't able to actually communicate with him. Like, the character that Bryan Cranston voices is like the main dog, right?
Chief, yeah.
Chief. But when he's interacting with Atari, yeah, like Atari, by all indications, is hearing barking sounds. This isn't like Detective Pikachu where the main character and Pikachu can actually converse. Even though everyone else hears Pikachu just go like, Pika, Pika. Like, at least we saw in the trailer, right? They're able to communicate somewhat. But yeah, in this film, it's just, Chief is just, bark, bark. And in his mind, he's saying, oh, we need to do this, or we need to go here. Or, like, don't make me, don't brush my hair or whatever. So, like, yeah, it just comes off really weird. I mean, I really, one thing I will give this film is that I really like the cast. Like, the voice cast. I mean, Bill Murray, obviously, people don't have to be told how great Bill Murray is. I mean, people have stickers of him on their cars. But, I think he's a good actor. Jeff Goldblum's kind of had a renaissance lately. Even Edward Norton is a very fine actor. I mean, the only casting criticism I would have is not having Owen Wilson. Because it's weird seeing a Wes Anderson film without Owen Wilson being in it. But besides that, the cast is actually pretty good. It's a pretty good cast.
Yeah, but I think, too, that might be one of the only reasons that people went to go see this movie is because they liked the actors in it. And for me, one of my favorites is Scarlett Johansson, and I love her voice. I think she's an excellent voice actor, and I know that I talked about The Jungle Book earlier, but she also voices Kaa in The Jungle Book, and she just has this super sultry, beautiful voice, and she was only in maybe 2 or 3 scenes of this movie, and I think that, maybe if they had played up her character a little bit more, because she is Chief's love interest, I think that they could have played her up a little bit more, and maybe it would have been a better subplot, and I think I might have enjoyed the film a little bit more.
Yeah, Scarlett Johansson, she does have a pretty good voice. I think she would be very good at ASMR if she obviously if she wasn't a multi-millionaire celebrity. But yeah, I mean, I think even with her voice, like you mentioned, there's a film called Her that came out. I think it was like late 2013, early 2014, and it's a movie by Spike Jonze. And in that movie, she plays a voice of basically like a operating system that's like romantically involved with Joaquin Phoenix. So, but like obviously not sexually because she doesn't actually tangibly exist, but he talks to her in the film. You know, she's talking into his ear. She's like, "What do you think about this?" and blah blah blah. And a little bit like a little sexy talk too. But yeah, no, you're right. Like they could have utilized her better. Like obviously, she probably has the best voice of any female in Hollywood today. Even the male actors too. I mean, Bill Murray. I mean, he go 25 minutes without listening to Bill Murray, or because Bill Murray, Jeff Goldblum, and Edward Norton are all like in the same pack as Chief, but then they get separated from Chief, and there's like what 30 minutes, or they're just hanging in like a people mover little bucket, right? Yeah, and it's like they don't do anything for like 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think that was just to sort of push forward Chief's arc because he does get all washed up by Atari and they sort of start to have this bond. And then for some reason, they all got mad about that, the other dogs in the pack. They thought that, he was being babied and they were like, well, we were doing all this work while you were just getting a bath and stuff. And I didn't really understand their frustration with that because all of them had owners before, or they call them masters, and they loved them and they loved being cared for by people. But they were getting mad at Chief, who had ridiculed them earlier in the film for, being attached to humans, and they're ridiculing him for this, which just sort of rubbed me the wrong way. Because,
well, I think they were like jealous. I think wasn't that like the implication, right? It was like these dogs are jealous of the one dog or Chief.
Yeah, I think just because they were doing work to push forward their plans of getting back to the city or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the weakest Wes Anderson film. I mean, never saw it, like I mentioned earlier. I mean, I didn't see Darjeeling Unlimited, but I think this is definitely the worst one that he's done in recent history. And I don't know, I mean, I just didn't feel like there was a lot of heart, and I feel like this film, it goes too far Wes Anderson. It's Wes Anderson like gone wild. and that's what this film really feels like, where he builds up all this mythos and he builds up all this backstory and prophecies and a fake city, and he does stop motion animation, and he does all of these things, and yeah, it's just like, what is like yeah, I mean, like I'm just trying to envision him trying to get the financing for this film, and he goes to whoever distributed it or whatever, and he needs $15 million to make this movie, or however much it costs to make. I just don't really know how he sold them on how this movie was gonna make money.
I'm not sure. I mean, maybe he was relying on his cast or something, but he just took so many creative liberties, and the movie just took so many tangents and had so many filler scenes that didn't really add to the plot at all. I mean, for example, there was one scene, and it was just, I think, a full minute or two, and someone was just making sushi. And basically the whole point was that they were going to be poisoning the Watanabe, the doctor, I guess, that developed the cure. And, that could have been done in 2 seconds. It could have just said poison, they could have dripped it on the sushi or something like that, but they took a full 2 minutes to just have someone cooking up the sushi, and I think that relying on filler rather than plot shows kind of how weak the plot is.
Yeah, and I mean, like most of Wes Anderson's films too, they very much are relying upon very dysfunctional people being very deadpan. So, for example, in Moonrise Kingdom, there's a scene where Frances McDormand, she tells Bill Murray, she's like, your daughter's missing. She's like, don't you care? And he says something like, do I have to answer that? Or I plead the fifth, right? Or, like in Royal Tenenbaums, there's a scene again with Bill Murray where he's married to Gwyneth Paltrow, and they're in some kind of hospital room with Angelica Houston, and I think another guy, I think her boyfriend or love interest. And Bill Murray just, again, deadpan, just says, you've made a cuckold out of me, just like in that tone of voice. And it works very well in those types of films where there's actual people World Tannenbaums too, of course, there's the scene towards the end where Luke Wilson, he ends up getting with his adopted sister. So not biologically related, but they grew up together. It's kind of like a weird element. And that's Gwyneth Paltrow. So she ends up leaving her husband to get with her brother. So it's very weird. But in the film, Luke Wilson, he tries to kill himself, and then like he's got like he tries to slit his wrist. Then he bandages himself up, and then he shaves his hair and he shaves his beard, and then he gets with his sister. But it looks a lot better when it's human actors emoting emotion. I mean, I was saying that situation is obviously terrible, but I mean that's what happens in the film. But it looks so much better with humans. And then in Rushmore, Jason Schwartzman is very attracted to his teacher, and Bill Murray is an older guy, and he's attracted to the teacher. So there's like a weird competitive element between this Bill Murray who's 50 and like a minor competing for this one teacher. So like they're both sexually attracted to this one woman, and it looks okay when it's like humans. I mean, if that was like stop motion animation, it would look really stupid. In Isle of Dogs, I guess with the plot, I mean, it's really hard to kind of say what they're really aiming to like say or do. And then again, having a character where the main boy is like the weakest character of all of the main cast, and he kind of seemed a little bratty to me. He kind of seemed a little bratty, and not being able to speak English, and not being able to read his subtitles because there were no subtitles for most of the time he spoke. It just was very hard to like emotionally relate to him.
Yeah, I think that emotion can sometimes be difficult to translate with stop motion, especially like you were talking about earlier. There's definitely certain types of movies that work with stop motion, but I think it's usually children's movies in which there isn't a ton of emotional depth. But with a plot like this, a lot of it is about the love between a person and their dog, because that's something that a lot of people can relate to. But with this movie, when you can't understand what the main character is saying, and you only really get the perspective of the dogs, and they're on a much bigger quest, that they aren't really focused so much on reuniting with their humans. It's more about the rights of all dogs and such. There isn't a ton to resonate with emotionally, and so I think that it suffers from that as well, because there is somewhat a lack of depth for the themes that he's trying to present.
Well, if you could, like, what movie would you like to see Wes Anderson do next? Like, if you had a choice. Like, what type of movie?
Honestly, that's really hard to say, because I feel like even though his films have such an aesthetic to them, they're all pretty different. And so I'd like to see him try to do somewhat of a conventional romance, but maybe in a crazy setting, like some sort of an action film that also ties in romance or something like that. Because I think with this film, it sort of was an action film. There were like fight scenes, but because of the limitations of stop motion, a lot of them ended up looking the same. They were all just sort of like clouds, these billowy clouds, and it was just sort of chaos in the middle, and you didn't really see what was going on, and it all kind of looked the same throughout the entire film. And so I think maybe if he tried to do something a little bit more clear, like I mean, maybe it's not even possible with stop motion, but something along those lines.
So, I mean, I looked him up earlier before I asked you that question, and the next film he has coming out is called The French Dispatch, and the film is described as the love letter to journalists set at the outpost of an American newspaper in 20th century Paris, and centers on 3 love stories.
Huh.
So, I mean, that actually kind of sounds a little bit more like the most traditional plot that maybe Wes Anderson's done since, or a long time. I mean, even, Moonrise Kingdom was a little off-center, but...
Yeah, I mean, I like Wes Anderson. I think that he's really artistic, and I really enjoy the aesthetic of some of his films, and I think that if you had his style mixed with a more conventional romantic movie, I think it would be really cool.
I would love to see some weird coming together of Spike Jonze, Charlie Kaufman, and Wes Anderson. Something where maybe Wes Anderson is like working the camera, Spike Jonze is directing, and Charlie Kaufman's writing the screenplay. Like, I think that would create the weirdest film ever created. Like, Spike Jonze, right? So he directed Her, like I mentioned earlier, but he also directed Being John Malkovich, an adaptation. And Being John Malkovich, has to be one of the weirdest ideas for a movie ever. Like, you ever seen Being John Malkovich?
No.
Being John Malkovich, the plot, like, Charlie Kaufman, he wrote the screenplay for it, and the plot is that there's a portal that exists in an office space that allows you to walk in that, and you walk into this portal and you can control the actor John Malkovich, and like you take over his body. And I just feel like if you could somehow get them together onto the same project, it could. I mean, could you imagine a Spike Jonze, Charlie Kaufman plot, but the visuals of Wes Anderson would look so weird. I'd like to see that. I don't know. I mean, this French Dispatch, I got to be honest, like, I don't know how excited I am about. I mean, it sounds very like generic, and Wes Anderson's films are just so like just so weird. I mean, even the Grand Budapest Hotel, even though that film wasn't like great, I mean, the way that it looked and the way that it was shot, like the wide shots, and there's a lot of depth to the shots. Like, there's a scene where Ralph Fiennes, he's like escaping the authorities. So like how the scene's set up, like Ralph Fiennes and these cops or these officers, whatever, they're like right in front of the camera, and then they say something like, "You're coming with us," and then he runs away. But you can see him, it's like in a lobby of a hotel, like in the hotel, and he's like running away, but you can see him like run quite a distance, and then they pursue him. So, I mean, that scene is shot like really great. It's like, wow, like, you don't see shots like that anymore. Mm-hmm. But yeah, again, I mean, I know we've talked about other things with Isle of Dogs. I think ultimately, yeah, if you're, I don't know. I mean, honestly, it's just boring. It's boring, and like there's a lot of like loud drum sounds, and you know, there's not a lot of dialogue, I feel like, and the dogs look very ugly. They're hard to kind of look at because they're dirty and they're filthy and they're feral. And yeah, I just feel like I don't know who you would be to like this movie. I honestly don't know what your background would be. Like, I don't know, like, I mean, if you're a big dog lover, then I don't know if you want to see filthy dogs. If you're Wes Anderson, you want to see Wes Anderson not 110%. It's literally Wes Anderson gone wild. It's like that old porn, Girls Gone Wild. This is Wes Anderson gone all the way wild. And you don't want all the way wild with Wes Anderson. You want 80% Wes Anderson, maybe. So yeah, I mean, I don't know who it's for. And I mean, when I watched in theaters, I just thought to myself, I'm like, wow, it's just so boring, and it's so long. I mean, I remember thinking, like, I looked at my phone like 40 minutes into the movie, and I was like, this movie's only gone on for 40 minutes? I thought it had been going on for like an hour and a half. Like, I just couldn't wait for it to be over, and it's a little sad because it's Wes Anderson.
Yeah, I know. One thing that usually works with Wes Anderson is his weird style and his weird pacing, because it's usually slower, but it's usually with the purpose of something. And for this movie, the slow pacing, really, like you said, it just made it kind of boring. And unless you have the capacity to really just sit there and you have the time of day and you can just absorb all that, then good for you. But I think for the general population, it's just boring, and it's a no-timer for us.
All right, well, perfect. Well, tune in for our next episode where we talk about one-timers and no-timers. And if you have any idea for any of these movies, leave it in the comments section, or it's an idea that you have for the next movie you want us to review.